Hey guys, welcome to this week's podcast episode. And I've got John David here, and he's a crisis communications and media relations expert and author coming out of Miami. And he's got decades of experience talking about expertise in crisis communication, which is really interesting. And I'm really happy to have him on the show. John, welcome.
Thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, this is you're the first guest of to specialize in this type of area. So talk about how you got started, and we'll dive right into the conversation.
Sure. I've been a public relations consultant for my entire career, going on 30 years almost. And so I started off as a traditional publicist, which, back in the 1990s was a different job before the internet. And when you had daily newspapers were dominant and radio stations and TV stations were dominant. You had national magazines, national newspapers, that sort of thing. And since that's evolved, so I'm not really a traditional publicist anymore. It's that sort of job has changed so dramatically. What's happened is that I've seen a lot, and over the years, had lots of clients that have been in interesting situations. And a few years ago, I wrote a book about online reputation issues, and that stemmed from me getting calls from clients about who are having problems online. And that's why I wrote the book, because I kept getting all these different types of problems. And I was like, okay, I'm not sure how to solve them, but I'll try to figure it out. And then I ended up writing a book about it. And I've continued to do. And as you get a little more senior in the PR business, you've seen more, you understand more. And it's evolved into that I have a crisis management practice. So I deal with a lot of I have clients that when they're having problems, when they're having issues, different types of issues, they call me. And so we have to figure out how to handle those types of situations.
Mm,
And so that's where I am right now in my
mm,
business world.
yeah, really interesting, and it brings up a lot of questions that the audience may be interested in. First thing, when you said when you used to get woken up and with certain types of problems, like kind of categorize these problems. What is it like a Paris Hilton, or is it like a Donald Trump, or what is this crisis that you're describing?
So I think crisis is relative, right? So one organization's kind of embarrassing situation could be an existential crisis for another type of organization.
Uh-huh.
And so the example I like to use is, imagine that you're sitting in a franchise restaurant, like fast food restaurant, McDonald's or Burger King or In and Out or whatever in your area, and a mouse runs across the floor. Now that's a problem, right? It's a problem. It might hurt that local restaurant, the local McDonald's or the local In and Out burger, whatever it is. It's embarrassing for them, but they're going to fix it, and it's not going to really impact their bottom line. It might hurt that local franchisee or whatever for a little while, but it's not going to be like national news. It's going to impact the stock price. But if you have a local restaurant, if you run a mom and pop Italian place or whatever, and a mouse runs across the floor, that could be an existential problem. That could put you out of business. And that's the difference. That a crisis is relative. So one company's major crisis could be another company's nothing crisis. So every business, I think, has to have some plan in place to understand, like, what is it that could happen to them that could turn into something that could become enough to impact the business, enough to be existential. And I work on a number of different industries, and every industry is really vulnerable because it's so easy to get information out these days. You have a phone in your pocket, you can go onto Twitter/X or whatever it's called today, and you can post information instantaneously that the whole planet can see. And you can make a video, you can be truthful or you can be dishonest, you can be all these different things. And those communications channels, the fiber optic cable and the Wi-Fi, doesn't care. It's just going to say whatever you say. It's going to post whatever you say is posted. So every business has a level of vulnerability to being in a crisis situation because it's so easy to get information out these days.
Mm. Yeah, really interesting. It reminds me, especially after COVID, I started just asking myself, like everything I do, when is the last day? Like when is it time to always thinking ahead? And my crisis is people going on leaving a negative review, but by that time I'm actually doing a lot of different things. So it's like that way you can combat misinformation, disinformation. So the next question I have for you is, especially with, you mentioned social media, and then there's this area of misinformation and disinformation. And then also, on top of that, you're going to have AI, which is going to pour gasoline on the fire. Where is this applicable? You mentioned franchise, mom, pop. Is it politics? Also, there's a lot of distrust with mainstream media, given there's they feel like it's propaganda. So how does this factor and play in?
So yeah, there's a few questions in there. So I think that I'll start with one is saying that what I think every company, every business should do, and then we can talk a little bit about social media, and then we can talk about fake news, so kind of that kind of thing. But like every company, so like I said, a crisis is relative. So if you think about if you're running your business, think about, okay, what could be a problem for me, right? If you're a bank or if you hold anybody's personal information, then you should be worried about privacy issues or a cyber attack or a phishing attack that compromises your data, right? If you have a big company and you have a lot of people, you might want to also be thinking about what happens if you have a human resources problem. There's a sexual harassment claim, or you have a succession issue. That, like, what happens if your CEO decides that what something happens to your CEO? Who's going to be in charge after that if that person decides to leave, or if something happens to that person? There's a million different things that can happen to a business, and most business owners think about it. Most business owners say, oh my gosh, I hope this is my worst case scenario. So think a little bit about, okay, what could happen to your company and what would that problem be? And it depends on the industry you're in. I do a lot of work in real estate. You have companies that go and they go buy a piece of property, they want to build a building on it, and the people who own the buildings next door, they don't want it to be they don't want it to be that tall. They don't want it to be that close. They're not happy about construction. There's going to be noise. There's going to be dust, whatever. And those types of things can turn into a viral problem. So it switches next gear social media. You should also be concerned about how you should be monitoring how your business is being perceived online. If folks are looking at your online reviews, then you should be making sure, as best you can, that your happy customers are leaving positive reviews. You want to try to influence that process as much as you can, because in many businesses, that's the first place people go. Now, it's not every business, but it's in many businesses. And also, if it's really negative, and if you have a lot of negative stuff, it can really impact your business. So that's number two, is look at your social footprint and how you're being perceived. And then at the same time, when you get into social media and you start talking about politics and everything else, you and I have just met. I don't know where you fall on the political spectrum. The best what I learned from my parents was, you don't talk about things you don't talk about at cocktail parties. Politics is one of them. And so I wouldn't necessarily get into it. And I would suggest you say the same thing to your employees. Keep your politics to yourself. And because and listen, if you want to go knock on doors for Kamala Harris, or you want to go knock on doors for Donald Trump, or you want to go knock on doors for your city, you're in Texas, you want to go knock on doors for Ted Cruz, that's your personal business. You can go do that. But don't get into a firefight online about this, because people get very emotional about this, and it doesn't do you any good. So you don't want to make sure. And then the next thing is, be careful what you post, because now you're absolutely correct with AI and these things. You sit there and you see these deep fakes and things like that. And it's really easy to see something and go, oh my gosh, look what so-and-so is saying, and realize it's not real. You don't realize it's real. That you don't realize that you think it's that person, but it's not that person. And so it's very easy to be fooled. And then you just decide, oh, I'm going to retweet this. And all of a sudden you've offended a bunch of people. And ultimately what we're trying to do in business is we're trying to be good business people, and we're trying to serve our customers. We're trying to be authentic, as everybody wants to say. But at the same time, you don't want to do something foolish that ends up impacting your business, because those things happen. That you see them all the time. Somebody says something, makes a mistake online, and then all of a sudden they're out of work because their boss says, listen, you said this incredibly offensive thing, or you repost this offensive thing, and it doesn't reflect properly on our business. And if you're in Florida like me, or you're in Texas and it's an at-will state, I think Texas is an at-will state, they can let you go, and you really don't have much you can do about it. So there's lots of there's lots of angles to this issue.
Yeah. And so one thing is protecting your reputation. And so what are some common mistakes companies make that lead to reputational damage?
I think the biggest thing that companies can do is to prepare a little bit. Okay. There's certain things that you can have. For example, there's having a media policy in place. If something were to arise, if a reporter calls your company, if you have 10 employees, or sometimes it's worse if you have a small number. If a reporter calls, what are they supposed to do? You should have a media policy. You can tuck it in with your employee manual. It says, listen, you're not the CEO is the only spokesperson for the company. If you ever get an inquiry from the media, make sure you reach out to the CEO. I have my contact information on a bunch of those media policies for my clients. Somebody reaches out to them, like they say, listen, forward this on to your media supervisor, the CEO, and to the PR consultant. So you have a policy in place that says, listen, you're not a spokesperson, right? You should have a social media policy, which says you don't speak for the company. Don't put your company logo on your Twitter page. No, you don't speak for them. Clearly don't give away company secrets and things like that. If you look at the big tech companies, they have rules that say, listen, you can't, if you work for whatever, you work for Dell or you work for Microsoft, they don't want you blogging about technology. They don't want you writing a blog about programming because you're a programmer for Dell or for Microsoft. It's in their policy. You can't have your own blog talking about cloud computing because that's in contradiction with what we do. You're talking about business, and we don't want you doing that. So you want to have those types of things in place for businesses so that they can prepare at least a little bit. Like I said, if something goes sideways, that there's at least they're kind of going in the right direction, and they can make a response in a timely way.
Yeah, really good advice, and kind of just keep it in the back of your mind. We have a lot of audience, they're podcasters or they got a YouTube channel, and it's a good thing to keep these in mind before your channel really blows up and you could really get in trouble. And it's always good to keep these in the back of your mind. One thing that was really interesting is one of my colleagues from undergrad, he runs a company now, and he had the same thing talking about there's a mission focused, and we're not going to talk about politics or woke or all these types of things in the company. And when crisis hits, what are the best communication channels? Is it Twitter? Is it LinkedIn? Is it a blog post? Is it social media? Is it going on the national networks? What is effective in management crisis?
Sure. I think that's a really good point. I think that the next thing of the kind of how to be prepared is to understand how you're going to distribute information. Do you have everybody's email address? Do you have everybody's phone number? Do you have, so you can send, can you send out texts? Can you send out emails? Do you have all that information so you can reach everybody in your company if something were to go wrong? And then the traditional rule, like in politics, is you always respond where you're being attacked, right? So if you're being attacked on TV, you respond on TV. You get attacked in the print media, you respond in print media. So I think the biggest thing is that if you're dealing with something that's happening on social media, I think you follow through on primarily your social media channels. I think it's important that a lot of companies will say, I'm not really on Facebook. I don't want to be on Facebook. I don't have a LinkedIn page for my company. But those are actually really easy ways to have a channel that you can then put your information out if something were to go wrong. So you can very easily, if something happens and you want to issue a news release, you can take that news release, you can post it on your Facebook page, you can post it on your Twitter feed, you can post it on your LinkedIn page, you can distribute it out in other ways so that it gets out into the world through the internet and everything else. So there's a lot of different things you can do, but typically you want to be prepared to respond via the channel where you're feeling the vulnerability. And when it comes to traditional media, it's just important to understand that there's ground rules, right? And there's ways of working with the traditional media outlets. Now, some of the new bloggers out there who may not play by the traditional rules, they may not know the traditional rules. If you're dealing with an individual on social media, they may not, and they're upset with you, they may not follow traditional pathways. But when you're dealing with a traditional media outlet, there are rules of engagement that they teach you in journalism school, and you should try to follow them. The so-called journalistic ethics, which people have often called a contradiction in terms. But there are rules of engagement when it comes to the media.
Yeah. The other question I have is what is the role of the traditional media in times of these? Because now there's a large public distrust and there's growing distrust, and a lot of like my nephew, like Gen Alpha, Gen Z, they get their information from TikTok, these short TikTok videos. And so how do you tell what's real, what's not? You listen to these political campaigns. He said this, she said this. It's just all it just gets muddled up. So how do you know
Sure.
this information?
Sure. Yeah, obviously we're in an election, it's an election season. I would tell people to get the information from as direct a source as they possibly can. Meaning, if you're really interested in a candidate, go listen to log on to go to their website and read their stuff that's on their website. Listen, if they're giving a speech, go listen to the speech. Get a copy. If it's on YouTube, listen to the speech. So you hear them and you don't get the cuts of it. I'm not sure what our timing is here, but when we're recording this, there's presidential debate is tomorrow, right? And normally I wouldn't timestamp your podcast, but it's relevant because after what's happening now in communications world is fewer and fewer people are actually watching the debate. They're just waiting for the reaction to see the cutouts, the cut ups. What did so and so say? What were the zinger lines? And what does everybody think? Versus watching it yourself and having your own opinion. So I think if you really want to get people to try to get the information as directly as you possibly can. So you can get information from the actual source, get it from the source. Because what's changed a lot in journalism is that the lines have gotten blurred, and there was a time when journalists were really trying to report the news and they really wanted the facts, and they were just trying to get the facts and tell you the facts. And now, particularly with like cable news, it's facts with spin. And then they bring up here's a soundbite, and then we're going to give you 2 or 3 different people's opinion on the soundbite. And would they be better served with just playing more of the actual speech versus having somebody talk about the soundbite? That's a ratings question for which I would probably lose that argument. But I think the main thing is get your information from a direct source as possible, and also just see if it makes sense. Because there's a lot of times what happens is things that seem, and it's the same thing you teach your kids. If it sounds too good to be true, if it sounds fantastical, it probably is. So double check. There's no downside to checking facts as much as you can.
Yeah. How can people find out more about you and check out your work and your book and so on and so forth?
Sure. My website is davidpr.com. So just davidpr.com. My name is John David. I did write a book about online reputation issues, available on Amazon and where finer books are sold, as they say. It's called How to Protect or Destroy Your Reputation Online. And I'm very accessible guy. If anybody has a question or they need it, or they're looking for some advice on how to deal with the situation, I'm always happy to talk to people. And if I can't help them, I'll point them in the right direction as best I can. I've been a communications guy for a long time. It's my career and I enjoy it. It's interesting stuff to me always. So if anybody ever wants to bounce an idea, give me a call.
Yeah, I love that. And for the audience, be sure to check out John's resources, give his socials a follow, and thanks so much for coming on.
I appreciate it. Thank you very much. Very interesting.